Alright, welcome everybody. We're talking with another video lesson today, and we are starting with the War for American Independence. So today, and pretty much today only, hopefully we can talk about it a little bit more as we go on, but today is all about talking about the War for Independence, the actual fighting that took place during the Revolution. We've talked about the philosophy, we've talked about the hearts and minds of the people, talked about the grievances and the reasons why the colonists were going to do this, and now we're going to talk about the actual fighting of the war. So that's what we're going to get into today. Our objective is explain the various factors that contributed to the American victory in the Revolution. Key terms, mostly battles, couple of people, one treaty, although the treaty ended up cutting, but it's still there. Why were the Patriots able to defeat the apparently overwhelming forces that faced them on the side of the British? That is a big brain question of the day. That's what I want you to think of while we are going through all of this. And if you remember from yesterday, that's what the do now question kind of was. When did the fighting start in the colonies? Well, it started in 1775. What was the battle called? It was called the Battle of Lexington and Concord. What was its nickname, right? The shot heard around the world. What happened? And if you remember what happened, British redcoats were sent from Boston to Concord to try to capture leaders of the Sons of Liberty and colonial weapon stocks. The Minutemen, right, that were said to gather at a minute's notice, knew this was happening. They heard about it from Paul Revere and other sources. So they gathered up, armed up, and the first battle where shots were exchanged, the colonials, the Minutemen, were forced to retreat. And then they gathered around Concord. They were forced to retreat at Lexington. They gathered at Concord. And they gathered and they gathered, and the British were looking and couldn't find anything because everybody had been warned. And then as the British are coming out, they're starting to get attacked and harassed by these colonials. And they're forced to retreat, and they retreat all the way back to Boston with colonials attacking them the whole way down. And that's the battles of Lexington and Concord. That's the first fighting of the Revolution. That's pre-declaration. And it's only going to move on from there. There's still going to be fighting pre-declaration, and then declaration will come, and we'll get into all the fighting at Boston and all that stuff. So let's go on and move forward. If you need this slide, go ahead and pause. War for Independence. Objective. And now this is the one key point of the day, and it is a lot of key point, but I didn't want to cut it into pieces because it wouldn't make as much sense. So it's just the one key point for today, and then the rest of the day we're going to spend just talking about the battles and stuff. Despite considerable loyalist opposition, as well as Great Britain's apparently overwhelming military and financial advantages, can't be stressed enough, the Patriot cause will succeed because the actions of colonial militias, the Continental Army, and George Washington's military leadership, the colonists' ideological commitment and resilience, and the assistance sent by European allies. So that's basically like a one sentence on why the colonists won. But there's no spirit, there's no soul, and there's definitely not enough information in there. But you get that the British looked like on paper like they should win, but somehow the colonists still won, right? And how? Why? And that's what we're going to get into. Now, the information on these slides that come up, you don't necessarily need every single little piece of information, right? This isn't a military history class, it's a survey class. You need to know the course of the battle, you need to know what happened, but you don't necessarily need everything. Now I'm going to try to do good at pointing out what you absolutely need and what you may or may not be able to leave off. If I were you, I would just get a little bit of everything, like a little bit, just like this battle and what happened, like just so you know more or less how it went through, because we're not going to talk about all the battles by any means, and there was a lot of battles, especially a lot of little ones. But if you need this first key point, we're going to pause here and we're going to move on to the tail of the tape. So, tail of the tape, what is this? What's going on? Well, this is what the battle looks like on paper before any fighting starts. What do the Patriots have? Well, they have home field advantage. They also have familiarity with the territory. Their supply lines are easier to maintain because everything they've got's right there in the colonies. They don't have to send anything from overseas. And they have what I would like to call the will to win, right? They want this. They want this more than the British do. Like if you're ever watching, like the basketball playoffs are going on right now, like a playoff game or something, and the announcer's talking about, oh, he wants it more. Who wants it more? Like that, the colonists, the Patriots, they want this more than the British do. A lot of British troops don't even care. This doesn't affect them, what the outcome of this fight, but the British want it more. Or the colonists want it more. What do the British have? They have money. They have a lot of money. They have better equipment. They have the best navy in the world. They have a well-trained and professional army. When you fight by the rules of 18th century warfare, which we're going to talk about right now, they are really, really good at it on paper. And they also have loyal Tories in the area that support them. This isn't I just put this here so you know that even the Patriots have to deal with Tories and loyalists that are going to fight as well, especially in the South. Now, one quick note about 18th century warfare before we move on. I got here my little red coat and my little Minuteman. Now, there were rules to fighting wars in the 18th century and beyond and earlier and all that stuff. And the good, powerful armies of the world fought by those rules. Those are the rules they followed. They didn't break them. They didn't sneak around. Things like spies weren't a thing. Things like snipers weren't a thing. Those were against the rules. For example, the British and French and Prussians and any of those major European powers wouldn't shoot officers in battle, because the officer is supposed to be like the gentleman that's leading the troops, right? You need the gentleman to lead the troops to make sure all the troops kind of act appropriately and do what they got to do. And the idea of doing something like that, of shooting the guy in charge, the guy that knows all the stuff, the guy that can read the maps, is like absurd. It doesn't happen. The British see this happening and they're appalled by it. Whereas the Patriots, the Americans, they don't fight by the rules. In fact, they loved. I always like to say that George Washington, like, his favorite thing to do was break rules, which is why it's so silly that people thought he never taught a lie. He loved to lie. It was his favorite thing. He loved spies. He loved hearing info from spies. He was really good at taking in information from his allies, his other like sub-commanders, and he loved to break the rules. He knew that you can't win a fight against the British fighting traditionally, and all of the good generals on the Patriot side will know this. Like, Nathaniel Greene knows this stuff. Henry Knox knows that. They know that if they fight traditional fights, they're gonna lose. The fools of the war, like Horatio Gates, who we won't really get into. I think it was Horatio Gates. Like, they think they can fight like toe to toe, and you can't go toe to toe with the British and expect to win, regardless of how bad you want to win. Because no matter how strong your will to win is, a bullet's still gonna kill you. But the colonists do a really good job of fighting these unconventional fights, these unconventional warfare. They'll attack at night. They'll sneak into camps and, like, get everybody while they're sleeping. They'll shoot officers. They'll hide behind trees. They'll attack groups while they're moving and not formally announce themselves. They'll do all sorts of stuff to win these battles. And that is going to be a major part of why the colonists are going to end up winning, or why the Americans are going to end up winning this war. Like, it all adds up little by little by little. But let's move forward. Let's talk about one of the first big battles. So, Bunker Hill. After Lexington had conquered, the British are chased back to Boston, and that's where they sit. And the colonials lay siege to Boston. They surround it, right? If you've never seen a siege, you basically encircle and trap the forces inside of the city or the castle or what have you. So this stays that way for a couple months, and then when the Second Continental Congress meets, Washington is declared the commander of the Continental Army, and he goes to Boston to take command. And right as he's getting there, the British decide, all right, let's counterattack. So they set up defenses on Bunker Hill and nearby Breed, so they being the Patriot forces, the colonists, the Americans. We're going to call them the Americans or the Continentals from now on. And the Continentals set up defenses, and they're all along these hills, and they're fortified, and they got these barriers, and they're protected, and they're like in little, like, would-be trenches. They're called, what are they called? I'm forgetting what they're called. I can't believe I forgot on the recorded session. Whoop, can't do that. Can't believe I forgot. What are they called? They're like they're like part trench, part fortification. I forget what they're called at the moment. I apologize for that, but we will move forward. If the name comes to me, I will remind myself and let you guys know what it is. But basically, they're all up on top of these hills. So they have the high ground, and the British are a bunch of Anakins having to climb their way up the hill and take the hills. Now, here's the thing. The British are going to do that. And the colonists are going to sit up there, the Continentals, they're going to be lined up, they're going to be ready, they're going to be waiting. And they're actually going to handle the situation pretty well given the circumstances. If you've ever heard the expression, don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes, that was supposedly said here by a Continental general whose name escapes me. It was like, not Isaac, but it was, I'm forgetting the specifics, I apologize. But That is said to have been said here. And when the British got close enough, the Continentals just opened fire, just rat-a-tat-tat, just line after volley after volley after volley of shots, and they killed about 1,000, more than 1,000 redcoats, British redcoats, at point blank range practically. If you've seen somebody was mentioning earlier when we were talking about making bullets that they've seen The Patriot. If you've seen that movie, that's the battle the colonel's talking about, where he's like, "Well, we killed them at point blank range, and they still took the ground." And something I forgot to mention at the top, right? The way you fought a battle is your armies met, they fought, and then whoever took the field won. You didn't chase them into the anything. There's no mechanized warfare. There was cavalry, but it wasn't really, you didn't. It was the Enlightenment. You didn't really chase people down and kill them all. So once they ran away, you took the ground. You would try to put chase to them, but it wasn't as effective as you would think it was, and it wasn't like with the intent to like destroy armies. It happened, but it's rare. But anyways, so the British suffered 1,000 casualties. The Americans lose around 400, give or take. Some people say it's a little less. But the British still took the field. They took Bunker Hill. They took Breeds Hill. They took Bunker Hill. And one thing that it led to this defeat for the colonists is that they supposedly ran out of bullets. So that's something that happens, right? You're up there, you're on the hill, but you just run out of supplies. They didn't have any. This is very early on. You didn't think you would need that many, and even if you didn't think you needed that many, you didn't have that many, so they lose. But this is going to lead to Washington's first great victory, and then his string of defeats. Because while this is going on, let's move on. Let's move slides. So if you still needed this slide, go ahead and pause and we'll move on. So after receiving cannons from British forts, from a British fort, from Henry Knox, because again, the Americans, the colonists, the Continentals still have Boston like under control, under siege. Even though they lost Breeds Hill, they still have Boston under siege. The British weren't able to break out. But Henry Knox, who was a military leader, took some cannons that were at this fort that was captured very early on. Ticonderoga, I believe, was the name. You don't really need to know the name. And he gives them to Washington, and Washington sets them up along Boston. And the next day after he sets them up, the British see the cannons and they're like, "Oh, they got us." So the British leave. They get in their boats, they leave. And Washington secures Boston. And it's a short-lived victory because Washington knows, and everybody knows actually, that the British are going to come back, and when they do, they're probably going to come back through New York. So the British return to New York, and it's that Hamilton song, right, where it's all the ships and it's all the soldiers. I think it's 25,000 soldiers show up or something like that. Might have that number wrong. I'll double check. But they show up, and you've got like the Battle of Kips Bay and a bunch of other battles where Washington's just going to lose. The Continentals almost get cornered, but they were able to cross the river at night and escape. And Washington's on the run for that whole first winter. And then the winter comes in, and his men are starving. Not starving, but hungry. They're demoralized because they haven't won anything in a long time. They don't really know what that's like. So it's the winter of 1776. And it's Christmas Eve, and Washington knows that if this revolution has any chance of success, they need a victory, right? And so the British had hired a bunch of Hessian mercenaries, they're like Germanic and mercenary troops, and they're chilling at Trenton, just partying, drinking cider, doing their thing that they would because, it's the winter. You don't fight in the winter. It's against the rules. I'm not even kidding when I say that. I even chuckled saying it because it's true. It's wintertime. It's nighttime. You don't fight during the winter. So this is where that famous portrait comes up where Washington crosses the Delaware River on Christmas Eve, and he's preparing to attack these Hessian mercenaries. And he does, and it's successful, and he captures a whole bunch of them, and it's a huge, humiliating defeat for the British, who try to counterattack at Princeton and other places, but those attacks fail as well. And Washington gets his next, big major victory. And then the battles kind of move on from there. There's some wins, some losses, various degrees of success, but every time winter hits, it's really rough, right? So what's going to happen before the winter of 77, we're going to move on, is the Battle of Saratoga. Now, this battle is considered by many to be the turning point of the conflict. And the reason it is because after a decisive American victory, right, the Americans attack and wreck the army. I think Benedict Arnold, if I'm not mistaken, was the guy in charge. the French realize, okay, these guys might actually be able to win this war. And so they send the guns and the ships, right? They send the French Navy, they send an army, they send a lot more supplies, and they actually dedicate themselves to allying with the American cause. This is going to bankrupt France, by the way, but, Louis XV is kind of a fool and doesn't really care. He just wants to stick to the British. So this is one that you need to get down. Battle of Saratoga, 1777. The French join us after this victory. So, in fact, I'm going to add it here. I'm going to put the date in so you know it. All right, Saratoga, 1777. I'm actually going to go to Trenton and do the same thing. 1776. So, again, 17. I put 6 here, didn't I? It's supposed to be 7. Now, Saratoga, turning point. French join the American cause. You gotta know that. Have to know it. So I'm gonna move on. We're gonna talk about the winter at Valley Forge. This is in the winter of 1777. And again, anytime winter came up, it was just rough and harsh and not good for the Continental Army because they had no supplies. They had bad hygiene. They weren't trained well. And between the wins and the losses being so sporadic and scattered, they had really low morale. Now, you have to give credit to Washington's leadership because he helped keep things from boiling over and getting worse. I'm specifically talking about Valley Forge. Like at Valley Forge, they were the only thing they had to eat were fire cakes, or they would take flour and water and just kind of like cook it in a pan and eat it, and it was like disgusting, and it wasn't anything, and it was not good. But some people would also eat like leather and things like that. It didn't quite get as bad as like Starving Times, Jamestown bad, but it was close. But their lack of supplies or lack of morale, it was looking rough. There was some desertion, and they're always going to face this come winter because they don't have enough supplies to keep their guys fed and warm and all that good stuff. But what's going to happen at Valley Forge that's going to make a huge difference is that Washington's going to get a little bit of help. Because Washington himself is a pretty decent, okay soldier, but he's no drill sergeant. Right? He's a leader. He's a tactician. He thinks. He's a general. But who they're going to get is a Prussian war officer. And I've told you before, and I've kind of been seeding this throughout the first couple weeks, right? That like Prussia has really good land armies, like famously good land armies. When Germany becomes a thing, the reason their land armies will be so good is because of that Prussian military heritage, that tradition. Well, this Prussian officer will help train the army for war at Valley Forge. And this guy's name, and we're going to move on, was Baron von Steuben. And he trained them in drills. He drilled them. He taught them how to march. He taught them how to shoot accurately as an army, not as like one guy, Frank, who's the rifleman who hunts deer his whole life that's really good at shooting. They taught them as a military unit how to practice and how to shoot accurately in volleys. How to use bayonets. A lot of them have been like, they never used a bayonet. How to use bayonets. He taught them how to clean themselves, how to act like soldiers. I'm not kidding, how to clean themselves. He taught them, where to use the bathroom so you don't just get dysentery in your entire camp. Weird little things like that, like discipline stuff. He taught them how to fight like a European army. And yes, breaking the rules is good. It helps you win battles, but in order to win the big battle, you got to know how to fight like a disciplined army, right? So now you've got an army of rule breakers that's disciplined like a trained army. So they're willing to break the rules, but they fight as good as a regular trained army. And that's a dangerous combination. And you don't get that without Baron von Steuben, who Ben Franklin found him hanging around in France and, hired him to go back to the Americas to train soldiers. Now, if we're talking about individuals, we also got to talk about John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones is an OG, like the baddest MFer on the planet. Why is he like that? Well, who has the best navy in the world? The British do. But try telling John Paul Jones that his little group of merchant ships that were converted to be battleships, merchant ships that they're not made for war, wasn't going to do something. So he sails to the British Isles and he captured and attacked ships all up and down the British Isles. He would attack, he'd go back to France, he'd get ready, go out again, raiding towns, evading capture the entire time, basically fighting like a pirate. He used pirate tactics to win. I believe he lands in Sweden, with a couple of captured British ships, and he loses his flag, which is a not good thing. You're supposed to have like your nation flag, so that way you don't get arrested for being a pirate, but everybody's kind of cool with what's going on. So they quickly make him this flag based on what Ben Franklin said the American flag looks like, and it's pretty cool. I have one for my classroom. Hopefully that'll be up, when we go back to school, so y'all can see. But this is basically like this is a cool little like John Paul Jones flag. So John Paul Jones fought like a pirate, just beat up the British left and right in Britain, in the British Isles, despite them having the best navy in the world. Again, not afraid to break the rules. And of course, of Hamilton fame, we all know this guy's name by now, Marquis de Lafayette. French noble, military officer, he led troops in the Revolution, negotiated supplies from France and money to aid the Continentals in their efforts. It's just important to note him, but again, most of us know him. But that's pretty much him. And the Battle of Yorktown. So this is the last battle, again, of Hamilton fame. The last battle of the Revolution, so to speak. So this one's a good one to get down. And again, I didn't put the date. What's wrong with me? So there's the date. The British changed tactics. They focus on the south, but that doesn't really work out well. Cornwallis gets trapped at Yorktown. He thinks he'll be okay because he can be resupplied from the sea, but the French have shown up and they happen. This is like the one British fleet they managed to destroy, and out of the 10 battles they'll fight with British fleets, like it's the one they win, so good for us, right? And the combined naval and land forces of the French and of the Americans, even though the Americans don't have any naval forces there, they have land armies, lays siege to Yorktown. After about a month of being under siege, and never getting help, by the way, from some of the other generals in New York, which is a little weird, Cornwallis is forced to surrender. And what's happening overseas, by the way, this entire time in Britain, Parliament's like, why are we fighting this war? It's so expensive. What's the point? We're losing money. We were broke already from the last one. And eventually, they kind of force the king's hand, and he has to not capitulate his throne, but he has to give up this war effort. And there will be discussions of peace in Paris. This is just a map of Yorktown I like to show. These would have been the British forces. This is the river that they thought could be supplied, but you have French armies under Rochambeau. You have Washington's armies here, a couple of more mixed forces here, and then you have the French fleet in the ocean. So it was doomed to fail from the beginning. But this is it. After this battle, after Cornwallis' surrender, you will have peace discussions open up in Paris, and you will get the Treaty of Paris of 1783, which was the end of the Revolutionary War, which had a bunch of different little rules in it that we will talk about tomorrow. So, lastly, for your exit ticket, this is a solid paragraph of response. All right? So treat it like that. 3 to 4 sentences, maybe more, but you need at least 3 to 4. And try to include a claim. I'm looking for a claim. Why did the Americans win the American War for Independence? When did it happen? Was there a key battle? Or were they set to win from the beginning? Why couldn't Britain win? Or why didn't Britain win? So basically, answer this. Why did the Americans win? When did you know they were going to win? When was it cemented? Was there a key battle or circumstance that caused it, or were they going to win regardless from the start? Why couldn't Britain finish that fight or win their fight? So go ahead and move on. Check the question in Google Classroom. Make sure it hasn't changed, because I tend to change these sometimes. That is it for me, guys. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see you all tomorrow.